apropos, I watched that video several times. Um, Partially because I saw comments of people saying, "Well, I'm worried that what you're doing might." I don't get that. To me, it's also interesting, sort of the voice of it, of how this is a strange thought. To me, this kind of thing is exactly all the entirety, really, of what philosophy is. Now, I do something I think is very much like what you described, but I don't know if it's exact feeling or way that you would think of it. But and I also know that it comes from the era of my proto philosophy as a child, and being from divorced families where I had to adjust or wanted to adjust as quickly as possible to new situations. And I developed it technically as a logical skill, but I think it's probably rooted in that. I could be wrong, perhaps. I already had the tendency, and it's just something I used to adjust. But one way or another, this started this cycle. Um, that, in combination with my basic desire to be an individual and retain my own identity. Now, this is my idea of adjustment as a kid. I was a bit precocious, and was never adjusting was never giving in or not talking back or saying things to adults. It was a matter of learning the local customs. Oh, here's what you do, and here's when you go to bed, and all of these things, just changing into a mindset so I could understand who I was dealing with. I didn't submit per se or change uh, how I was in some deeper level, but just this framework. Okay, what ideas are we working with? How do I understand these people? And as I say, I developed that technically. And I think that now it's very interesting, the multitasking thing, because I've done that a lot, and you can multitask, and yet it's really funny because you do if you multitask. Like I watch movies and do other things, and for years I thought I was multitasking. Eventually, my brother pointed out that I miss a bunch of the movie. So what's about that? Since we know the brain is multitasking, well, I think it's kind of like we have two eyes, and I've tried in the past to focus, to defocus these eyes, and they're wired to want to come together and focus. You cannot do, I don't think, the chameleon thing where you're looking two different directions with two eyes. And chameleons can do both. They can focus their eyes and get a 3D vision, which they obviously do when they're hunting. You can see that when you watch them hunt. And then they can also decouple them and use what appear to be two different views that say somehow uh, do at once. So I think the parallelism of the brain is sort of consumed by some circuitry that wants to unify these, for evolutionary beneficial reasons, probably. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the entire thing, what you're talking about, is the purpose of learning philosophy. It's psychology from the inside. It's an attempt to deduce a sort of owner's manual for the mind. It's funny to me that if you consciously choose a train of thought, that this is sort of perceived as somehow dishonest or, too intellectual, or there's a lot of ways that this is criticized. And basically, people want things natural. They just want you to, and if you do it consciously, which takes a lot more work, somehow that is, that, that is somehow inferior, at least in terms of honesty or reality or something. I don't feel that way. I feel that, I do, well, I feel somewhat that way. I mean, I understand why people are getting that, because if you're consciously trying, it's easier for you to slip into another thing. On the other hand, if you're just wheeling along, it's also easy for you to bump off your track, find yourself in a different mindset, and not be able to reclaim that. But to me, this is very much, swinging through the trees and leaping through the air and grabbing things at the right time and managing all of this and moving yourself around the terrain, as Quine described, as I use often, a geographical metaphor for ideas. Navigating this is the purpose, the only benefit of philosophy. Once you abandon philosophy as a search for absolute or fundamental uh, or even inherent truth, uh, then really what's left is how do you think? You know, how do you do the thinking? How do you decide what you want to think? How do you decide how you want to feel about something? I decide how I want to feel about things. That may be good. That may be not good. But I do that. And when I find myself sort of rumbling along, or I'm getting angry about something, and I'm out of control of that, um, you know, it's not entirely just natural, like, well, I can decide it. No, it requires techniques. And as you say, there are various techniques. Now, I joke about Heidegger being a Nazi, which he was. Um, but seriously, the best philosopher that I've ever found for this kind of thing is Nietzsche. And especially since you'll find it very difficult to find a conclusion in Nietzsche that you can really say, hey, this was a conclusion, except in narrow areas about tools used for thinking, ways to think, mistakes of thinking, errors of thinking. And, you know, it's like you can study Goebbels for propaganda, but you got to do this with the idea that he was a Nazi in mind, that even his explanation of what he did might be layered with various kinds of manipulation and subterfuge. The Nazis, for such crazy bastards, were surprisingly good at this, and people forget just how civilized the German people had been, and really just through the suppression of losing a war and having a sort of an economic suppression after that, somehow made them susceptible. But you can't assume that it was like due to stupidity. Very, very smart culture of people at that time, as well as throughout history. Um, so, um, so I really, I mean, I'm not joking. Heidegger, to follow Heidegger is to walk down a path that a Nazi has set for you. I don't see how anybody could possibly think Heidegger was honest. I don't think there is any way to support the Nazi party and be honest. So it seems to me obvious. And once you get this suspicion of Heidegger, you will, and especially if you've read Nietzsche, then you will see, I think, that um, you know, if you find that he allows you to destroy and rebuild all your structures really quickly, well, you're witnessing, you know, some psychology from the inside there that's about doublethink and fascism more than you know. You can learn some things from it, but really, it's rather dangerous. And uh, Nietzsche, some people consider dangerous as well, but he's honest. He is very honest, and he is a provider of certain tools for thinking that will not make you think a certain thought. Well, I mean, some things, like one conclusion you can draw is his criticism of metaphysics. But you can live your life exactly the same way as if you believe metaphysics without believing it. So I really think he's not pushing you to certain conclusions. Now, we know Heidegger read Nietzsche and was obviously to a certain degree even a popularizer of Nietzsche. But this is one reason I have no respect whatsoever for Heidegger. For him to emphasize being, anybody that is familiar with Nietzsche's work will realize that this is a total perversion. This puts Heidegger on the other side of a divide that Nietzsche would definitely not approve of. Furthermore, considering that he broke his friendship up with Wagner over anti-Semitism and the stupid German tendency towards that Nietzsche witnessed. And but not for just for that reason, but because of Heidegger emphasizing being, which is one of the fundamental long-term errors of mankind, which Nietzsche analyzes and displays and reveals very well and uniquely in Western philosophy. So, so yeah, I applaud the idea. I think it is the purpose of philosophy. But I think if you follow Heidegger into his morass, you will find that it is more how to fool yourself and how to you know, how to play word games